All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to today's virtual conversation with Exponent Philanthropy. I'm Althea Georgantis. I'm a program manager at Exponent Philanthropy, and I'm here in our DC office with our CEO, Henry Berman. We're joined virtually by Jonathan Greenblatt in New York. He's the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Before we get started with our conversation, I just have some brief announcements. Please note that this event is being recorded. So first, I just want to give a quick overview of the Zoom webinar technology. There are some controls along the top of the screen I want to highlight for you. First, the audio button. That's where you can adjust your listening options. That's where you can adjust your volume, switch your headphones, or call in by phone. Then we have the Q&A button. This opens up a window where you can submit questions for the speakers during the presentation. Everyone can see the questions asked during the Q&A function, so you can go ahead and please submit questions as we go along, but just be aware that we may not reach everybody, as we have a lot of people on and a lot to talk about today. And you can also chat us privately using the chat function. That's the place where you can reach out to me, Althea, if you're having any technical difficulties. Please do not use the chat function for questions you have of the speakers regarding the content of today's talk. Just stick to the Q&A function for those. Exponent Philanthropy is the country's largest association of funders and the only one dedicated to serving foundations with few or no staff, philanthropic families, and individual donors. Our vibrant network has in common lean operations and a style of philanthropy motivated by personal passion, community needs, and the strong desire for better outcomes. We provide high quality and cost-effective programs, resources, and connections that maximize our members' dollars and time for the benefit of diverse communities and causes. We're partnering on this program today with ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Founded in 1913, ADL is our nation's premier civil rights and human relations organization. It works to fight anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. They advocate for anti-hate legislation on federal and state levels and file amicus briefs in civil rights cases. They educate students and adults alike to stand up to bullying behavior and intolerance. And they work with law enforcement to counter extremism and implicit bias in policing, and technology companies to fight hate online. And with that, I will hand it over to Henry Berman, the CEO of Exponent Philanthropy, to get this conversation started.
Thank you, Althea, and welcome, everybody. I'd like to begin by putting today into context and what brought us here. And as a reminder, I'm speaking as both the CEO of Exponent Philanthropy as well as the co-trustee of a leanly staffed foundation, a role I've been in for close to 15 years. So much of what I'll talk about today is firsthand. I've observed over the past few years that those of us in philanthropy, and I certainly include myself among those with shortcomings, have excelled at being reactive to issues. I appreciate that I'm generalizing to some extent, yet when I look at Ferguson, at Flint, at Baltimore, at Charlottesville, it feels like we're really good at rushing in after the fact to engage or to study the underlying causes. Yet I think we all know and can agree that there are more Fergusons waiting to erupt. There are more cities and towns with lead in the water. There are more hate groups that are growing every day. And we can no longer wait and react. As funders, we need to use our power. And I use that word power in every sense of the word to get in front of this issue. I've observed also that hate manifesting itself in so many ugly ways is growing right before our eyes. I believe it's epidemic, and there's a great risk of it becoming pandemic. As humans, and especially as philanthropists of all sizes and shapes who fund in all kinds of areas that meet our passions, we need to be driven by, we should be driven by a moral imperative to be in front on this one. I don't see any wiggle room here for any of us. This is truly a bipartisan issue. Hate does not belong to any one political party. So let's not use that as an excuse, no matter what your politics. So all of that brings us to today in our conversation with Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, where he leads all aspects of the most respected civil rights organization in the country, and I would add, among the best in the world. Since Jonathan took over in the summer of 2015, he's modernized the organization while remaining and refocusing on its dual mission that it's had since its founding over a century ago, to fight the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. Justice and fair treatment for all. He's vocally opposed bigoted policies such as the Muslim ban. It cemented ADL as the leader in tracking and fighting cyber hate. Prior to joining ADL, he served in the White House as a special assistant to President Obama, and he was the director of the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation. He came to that role after a long career as a serial social entrepreneur and corporate executive, starting and scaling businesses focusing on creating economic value and social good. That's something a lot of us talk about doing a lot of. Here's a guy who's done it, including co-founding Ethos Water, which was eventually acquired by Starbucks. Jonathan has a BA from Tufts University, his MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. I met him for the first time about 6, maybe 7 years ago, and I've learned a lot from him in that time. I often, in fact, I could say always leave conversations with him more knowledgeable than when I began, and he certainly is an inspiration to me. And if all of that were not enough, he and I share a passion for the Boston Red Sox. So go Sox, Jonathan, this is our year. Welcome.
Thank you.
Before we dive in, I want to add one more important thought. Today is a beginning. It's not an end. There's a lot for all of us to do and many ways for all of us to do it. And so with that, Jonathan, as I noted in my opening remarks, I'm troubled by the growth in hate in every form, not only around the world, but oftentimes right around the corner in our own neighborhood. So my first question is, am I making this up? Am I swayed by the top of the news where, they want to go for the most flashy kind of story? Is it just a handful of bad apples? Or is there really an increase of hate-related activities? And maybe wrapping into your answer, what do we really mean when we say hate?
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Henry, for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today and to be part of this conversation with Exponent Philanthropy and your broader membership. I mean, I think maybe this has always been true to you. I think it's never been more obvious to the broader public that we're living in a moment when we can't rely on government and the marketplace to solve our problems. Government has its role and its function, but also its flaws. And the political kind of paralysis in DC and the polarization more broadly really exemplifies that. And the marketplace, again, has its function, but also has its flaws. I think much of what we're struggling with, and there's been a spate of articles in the last 24, 48 hours on the ascendance of big tech and how all that plays out, just underscores the fact that we need a vibrant, non-governmental sector, a civil society, to make sure that it fills the gaps that, again, business and government doesn't meet. And the fuel of that sector is philanthropy. It's the charitable contributions of millions of Americans who every day make this work possible. So for me, it's a real privilege to be here and to tackle these kind of, I think, tough issues with you. So for starters, to your first question, are you imagining it? Is hate really on the rise? Look, I can talk to you anecdotally about what I've seen here in my 2.5 years at ADL as a CEO, but I prefer to focus empirically on what the data tells us. And yes, the data tells us that hate is on the rise. So first, start with what we get from our most official source, if you will, the FBI. The FBI, by law, tracks hate crimes, and they rely on inputs from law enforcement agencies, police departments from around the country. Now, I'll acknowledge that many police departments actually don't report hate. When I'm talking about hate specifically, to answer another one of your questions,
please.
I am referring to felonies or misdemeanors, crimes that are committed against an individual or an institution on the basis of what we would define as an immutable characteristic, something core to their being or their presence. This could be gender or faith or race or national origin or sexual orientation or physical level of ability. That's how we define, in terms of the law, what constitutes a hate crime. So, empirically, the FBI, which reports on hate crimes, tells us that in 2016, we don't yet have their 2017 data yet, hate crimes were up nearly 5% year over year against 2015. So I want to repeat, we saw almost a 5% increase in hate crimes. More than half of there were different kinds of crimes, take race-related crimes. More than half of those were committed against African Americans, either again individuals or institution. There are a large number of crimes that are based on faith, and of those, more than 50%, like 52%, were committed against Jewish individuals or institutions. Now, this could be a felony, like an assault, or a misdemeanor, like an act of vandalism. So what we hear from the FBI definitively confirms that hate is on the rise. At ADL, we also track and more narrowly or more widely also look at incidents. So unlike a hate crime, which would be prosecuted in the court, we also look at acts of harassment, where an individual or an institution is harassed. An individual could be bullied, for example, or something along those lines, because of the faith. So we look at anti-Semitic incidents. And I can report, because just 2 weeks ago, we released our 2017 data. So whereas the FBI has a year-long lapse, we don't. And in 2017, we saw a staggering 57% increase in anti-Semitic incidents. 57%. And I'm talking about almost double the number of acts of harassment or vandalism at K through 12 schools. Think about that. An almost 100% increase year over year. And a nearly 90% increase of anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses. So something is happening right now across society. It's happening in educational environments, it's happening in workplaces, it's happening in the public square. Anti-Semitism is on the increase, and hate more generally is on the rise. And for an organization like ours that is so focused on fighting all forms of prejudice, so focused on beating back bigotry whenever it rears its head, we are deeply concerned because we've never quite seen a moment like this, ever.
So, Jonathan, let me jump in there a sec. So I'm following about how you explained the definition of a hate crime and whatnot. So my first reaction is I'm thinking about that's the individual who commits a crime. And so that's recorded. But I guess I've thought a lot about organized hate, where groups of people are coming together. Is that coalescing of these individuals around a common hate,
Sure.
whether it's racial, ethnic, religious, whatever? Is that on the rise as well? Is that paralleling what you just described?
It is on the rise. So at the ADL, we track extremists of all kinds. Right-wing extremists, left-wing extremists, faith-based extremists. There are a range of different actors. But specifically, to give you an example, we have seen a fairly alarming increase in right-wing extremist activity, particularly white supremacists. They seem to be emboldened in this environment, and maybe that shouldn't be a surprise, because phrases that they literally developed, like, say, globalist, have moved their way from white supremacist chat groups into the headlines of the largest papers in the country. And we've seen their sense of emboldenment actually manifest in ways like an increase of their activity on college campuses. We saw a staggering increase of white supremacist flyering, recruiting, speakers, tabling, all kinds of activities on college campuses across the country. Literally this week there was a story about a group called the Sons of Odin, lovely organization, started in Finland, hyper anti-immigrant, leaning toward overt white supremacist, flyering at Clemson University in South Carolina. I mean, it is an unusual time when these groups feel so comfortable communicating their prejudice. And I think there's no better example than what happened in Charlottesville, where the University of Virginia is headquartered last August, where literally you saw these groups who used to wear white hats, now they're wearing khakis and polo shirts. And they're, instead of hiding behind those white hoods, if you will, and burning crosses on people's lawns, today, again, they're wearing khakis with smartphones and they're burning up Twitter. So we're in a moment where the organization of these groups has taken hold and accelerated at a pace that we've never seen. And our colleagues at the Southern Poverty Law Center released a report last week that reported a 20% some odd increase year over year in hate groups around the country. So we work with these guys and we're familiar with their research. Bottom line is that it is indeed at an individual level and at an organized level on the rise.
So let's flip that now to the organization on this side. Most of my members are small staffed, not necessarily small assets, but very small staffed, hands-on, very personal in their philanthropy. I know that, from when you were at the White House to your work with ADL, you've seen family foundations, small staff foundations across the country.
Yep.
You talked earlier about, philanthropy being the fuel of a civil society. What have you learned about the role of family philanthropy, of small staff foundations in this fight?
Well, so there are a few things. Some of this I learned when I was at the White House, running the Office of Social Innovation. We interfaced a great deal with civil society. And I worked not only with you, but with others. And some of this I've seen here in this job on the ground. ADL has 26 offices across the United States. They're doing education programs in communities. They work with law enforcement communities. They're, filing briefs, fighting for civil rights issues in communities. And those offices and this work is really enabled by philanthropy, as I said a moment ago, and family foundations play a really pivotal role. Essentially, they institutionalize individual giving in ways that give it structure, lend it a strategy, and help it to scale that it might not do if it was just left, to someone writing checks at the end of the year before to get their deduction. Family foundations are much more, like I said, strategic and deliberate, and they help to define how you move money at scale. And, if you think about Harvard sociologist Robert Putnam in his book, Bowling Alone, which talks a lot about this notion of social capital and how you bring and stitch together communities at the local level. I think family foundations can be the catalyst, if you will, to help make those connections and rebuild the social capital and re-erect the trust. Because we live in an age, the age of Facebook, and the age of WeWork, and the age of decentralized, and the age of networks. And so top-down, gigantic foundations, or big philanthropy, big government, big tech, they alone won't solve our problems. Indeed, I think this moment is much more responsive to kind of grassroots and efforts that start on the edge of the network and move in as they scale, as they succeed. And again, family foundations can play a pivotal role in helping to seed and propel those works so they jump from significance to success.
I think picking up on the Putnam reference, yes, and you mentioned Facebook, Twitter, whatever. Those technologies are allowing connections at a level, Putnam couldn't have imagined in the 90s when he wrote his book or whatnot. On the other hand, I worry, at times, are those technologies causing us to just gel around a cause, but not gel at a human level? And so do you see a role for these small staff foundations in their communities to bring people together beyond the technology in order to move that civil society forward?
Of course. Yeah. I think that the ability of the funder to find a promising program or to explore an interesting initiative and give it some seed capital to help stimulate it and help it to grow is crucial to its success. I'm someone who believes that these platforms like Facebook have played a lot of good. They've done a lot of good. They played an important role. They've helped connect people who might otherwise be very unconnected. But again, left on their own, they've also been exploited by extremists, right? They've been levered, if you will, by some of the worst elements of our society. So family foundations can help, again, by getting behind promising programs. Look, I'll give you an example. So the ADL, I was alluding to this a minute ago, we do three things. We do advocacy, education, and law enforcement. So number one, we work on advocacy campaigns to try to change laws through the courts and through Congress, literally to push back on hate and to find hope by trying to enable civil rights work, working to defend the First Amendment, working to protect minorities. Okay, we do this federal, state, and local level. Secondly, because you can't legislate your way out of hate, we try to change hearts and minds. So our education work, our second pillar, literally we today are one of the largest providers in the United States of anti-hate content in schools. The ADL touches more than 1.5 million kids every year with their anti-bias, anti-hate content in K through 12 environments. And then thirdly, we work with law enforcement. So our third pillar, along with advocacy and education, is law enforcement. We help track hate crimes. We have a whole research division that helps the police and the FBI investigate hate crimes. We track the bad guys, essentially. And then thirdly, we train law enforcement on how to deal with hate and hate crimes and the victims of such acts. The ADL literally trains more than 15,000 officers every year. We're the biggest NGO in America in terms of changing the way law enforcement thinks about this work. So that's what we do. So you think about what a family foundation can do if they said, you know what, I really want to work on intrinsic bias with a law enforcement, with a police department in a big city like Seattle, medium-sized city like Seattle. Or I really want to make sure that every kid in my community goes through anti-bias education so they're inoculated, immunized from intolerance before it happens. Or they say, you know, I really think it's time we activate and mobilize around DACA to protect dreamers, to make sure no matter where you're born as a kid in America, as someone who's entitled to a set of rights, you have the opportunity to realize those benefits. So I'm going to get behind a campaign in my local area to turn into a sanctuary city or to get my state to take action, etc. An individual on his or her own can't fund a Kickstarter or GoFundMe campaign that can really do this. But a family foundation with a community profile, with institutional reach, and with real financial capability, they have the ability to not just write checks, but to convene people and to mobilize, again, around an education initiative or around an advocacy campaign or around a law enforcement opportunity. That is a powerful capability that I think few segments of civil society really can deliver on, but family foundations can.
So I would argue, intellectually argue, that those of us who are small or leanly staffed foundations we're individuals before we're institutions. And so for me, it's all about relationships we need to build with individuals in our community. And I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes from the great labor leader Walter Reuther, who led the United Auto Workers and marched beside ADL, with Dr. King. Walter Reuther was fond of saying, we've got to make progress with the community and not at the expense of the community.
Yep.
So how do funders build those relationships with the community when it's such a potentially difficult or touchy subject, hate, when that's on the table? I mean, what barriers might they face in working those relationships? I mean, this is a case where, I'm a funder. I'm going to call up the high school principal, or I'm going to call up the local police chief, for example. And, it's not one of those phone calls where I'm leading with, hi, I'm from the Smith Family Foundation, and we want to give you a grant.
Yeah.
I'm in fact calling and pushing them on an issue that can be difficult. What suggestions do you offer for people for how do they make those entrees?
Well, look, I think you'd be surprised at how many the resources, the opportunities that are available to family foundations and other folks who want to engage in philanthropy at the local level. What we find is that, again, I think you could say the Family Foundation plays a role in this because it's relationship-based. Mm-hmm. These community organizations, be they NGOs or nonprofits like ADL or others, are typically on the ground, in place, with doors that are available for anyone to walk in. So we're engaged in schools, or engaged in state houses, or engaged in precincts, or engaged with houses of worship, or engaged in universities and colleges. And so the work can be accessed through any one of those different, I guess you could call them constituencies. The trick, I think, for the philanthropist is to try to find the exciting opportunity that really speaks uniquely to them. But that's the power of the Family Foundation. Again, I think you are relationship-based, and unlike just an individual writing checks, as the foundation, you have a presence in the community that gives you a degree of credibility and insight that's powerful, and that can open all kinds of access if you put it to work.
Along those lines, I've certainly heard funders say, well, Jonathan, that's all well and good, but I don't fund hate issues. Right. I fund in the arts. And I think my message to them, curious if you would add on to it, is that I suggest them to shift their perspective. And you can still fund in the arts, but use that channel to reach that community through the arts to address these issues. Yeah. So that it's changing perspective. It's not changing your passion.
I think that's right. I mean, look, there isn't one rote way to get this work done. So whether it's the arts, which could be, think about what we do, for example. So we're working in schools, right? So you can imagine a program where a funder could say, I want to get behind this arts program for kids, right? And empower them to use their gifts to undertake projects, I don't know, to paint murals, to build structures or whatnot, around understanding difference and being proactive about pushing back against prejudice before it happens. I mean, we, like our World of Difference program, which is a program we run in New England and Massachusetts and in other places around the country, it's a peer-to-peer model. So like middle school kids, mentor elementary school kids, high school kids, mentor middle school kids. So you can imagine using the arts lens to undertake that work. Or you could, think music. One of the things we do in a number of communities, we run concerts against hate that bring together members of the community, sometimes who are engaged in playing the instrument, sometimes they're famous artists, and members we like intersperse the music with spoken word and speeches about people who've gone through hate, suffered from it, overcome barriers, etc. So that might be another lens. So I think what it requires, what this work requires, is some degree of creativity. So you can imagine how you could use whatever it is, the avenue that's available to you or that you're comfortable with, to harness it, right? And to leverage it in order to drive down this path. But sky's the limit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made a good point there that people should pick up on, that when you talked, for instance, about a concert against hate that's interspersed with spoken word or whatnot, it's not only the message of the concert, but it's an opportunity to bring diverse communities together into the same room.
Totally.
So it's the daily double. You're hitting it on two levels. It's not just the program. Now, I also know, because there was a time when I was one of them, when, as a funder, you may be reluctant to dip your toe into something that's different or a little bit scary, if that's a better word.
Sure.
I also know that most of our members put a lot of their money on the local level into their communities. ADL's created a program, I think you call it the Mayor's Compact. Compact with mayors across the country, which I see as a door that somebody who wants to be involved but maybe isn't prepared or isn't ready yet to jump out in front could become involved. Can you just share a little bit about the Mayor's Compact with people so they can become aware of it?
So the Mayor's Compact has its origins in the Unite the Right rally that took place in Charlottesville last August. Mm-hmm. The ADL was tracking before it happened because we monitor these white supremacist and extremist groups. And we knew about the rally, and we worked with the mayor and the governor's office to let them know. Of course, the rally was, I think, larger than we thought or anyone thought it was going to be, and certainly more violent. That woman, Heather Heyer, was killed, and she was, run over, essentially, by a white supremacist in a car. So we reached out to the U.S. Conference of Mayors after the fact, said, hey, this happened. There are steps that we probably could have taken proactively, or the mayor could have in that case, to prevent this kind of melee from happening, within their city limits. Knowing that this was going to happen, there are proactive measures to deal with the crowd, to deal with kids, to deal with other issues that could have been done proactively, or knowing that this was going to happen retroactively. There's a better rapid response procedure that you could implement to mitigate the damage if something like this was to occur. So we offered this to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and together we collaborated and put together essentially like a plan, a 10-point plan to help mayors avoid this kind of incident in their own town. We developed it a few days after Charlottesville, and it encompasses things like bringing anti-bias content into the schools, training up law enforcement so they know how to deal with hate, developing and crowd control measures so you protect free speech while you preserve public safety, understanding how to report on the incidents that happen around this so it's effectively tracked. A bunch of things. Literally in 36 hours, Henry, we had more than 200 mayors from around the country sign up. And interestingly, these are Republican mayors and Democrats. These were red states and blue states. These were big cities and small towns. Everyone has a shared interest, you see. Everyone has a shared interest in preventing hate from happening, in their local community. So to date now, the Mayor's Compact has more than 300 members. We're rolling it out all over the United States and bringing the services and bringing the training and bringing the support to the city so they can integrate and implement it effectively. And, you know, there's no silver bullet to stop stereotypes. But we think this can be part of an integrated approach that, again, addresses intolerance before it happens.
So this is a nice, easy on-ramp for somebody in their community, presuming their mayor has signed on. And if there isn't, maybe you want to ask why not. But this is a way that somebody who wants to get involved but doesn't feel comfortable or have the knowledge or whatever immediately to dive in to engage in the conversation on a local level and start to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a way. So I think it's a way for a community that cares to proactively push out and to step forward and to indicate their level of interest in these issues, that they're not going to sort of stand idly by, but they're going to take decisive action before there's an accident. And then if there is something takes place, again, it's a way for a mayor or a first selectman or whatnot to kind of rally the right resources to respond effectively and to swarm the slander so they can stop it before it spreads.
Jonathan, I'm sure you've heard me talk about it. I often talk about giving beyond dollars, how foundations, individuals as well, but foundations in this case can leverage all of their resources to make a difference. They have the ability to share knowledge, make connections, catalysts for change, be leaders, conveners, advocates, and that's really independent of your assets. At the same time, they clearly also make grants. That's the primary business. Yeah. So I guess I'd wonder if you have any examples or suggestions or thoughts about how people can most effectively structure their gifts in the fight against hate. But at the same time, have you seen any pitfalls, any things that, boy, people have done this because they've maybe leapt before they looked, or, you know, heart in the right place, but intentions in the right place. But these are big mistakes you can make.
Well, I do think one of the things that I think you see generally in nonprofit and charitable giving in the nonprofit sector, and maybe particularly here where these issues can be very emotional, is people sometimes put their dollars towards something that pulls at their heartstrings, but otherwise might not speak to their head. So I've already said that I am a huge fan of creativity, and I'm a big believer in innovation. And my career has really been characterized by taking risks and trying new stuff. So I would suggest, we were talking about before, vis-a-vis the arts, exploring imaginative ways to use your dollars to tackle the issues. At the same time, in terms of so that's, I think, one of the things you should do. I also think you should look at ways to bring people together. So look at models of funding that convene different stakeholders around a table. You know, there's a social organizing concept called collective impact, which is somewhat interesting and may have some applicability here. But it's like, how do you get the ABL working with the Boys and Girls Club, working with City Hall, working with the local semi-pro baseball team? How do you get the local church and the mosque and the synagogue working together with the local university on some interfaith religious event? I mean, there are interesting ways I think you can bring together different players. So how would I approach this? Number one, try more stuff, take risks, innovate. Number two, kind of try to bring together diverse actors and use, again, the relational power of the Family Foundation to do that. But pitfalls, I think metrics are really important. And too often this work, again, we listen to our heart, not our head, and we put our dollars behind things that don't have any kind of quantitative basis or any kind of proof of concept. So whereas I believe in innovation, I believe in you taking small risks up front, and then you explore and you iterate based on progress, and then you scale what works. But I think funders would be foolish to disregard the importance of data, and they would be better served or well served if they made sure that there was a strong kind of set of metrics on the front end they would use to measure their success on the back end, so they can truly speak to progress. And if they don't have progress, they understand why and what to do about it.
So, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody of a couple things in what Jonathan said. One, that thoughtful risk is important. Foolish risk is not a good way to go.
Yep.
Understanding what you're trying to accomplish and using those metrics so that you have some sense of where you went. As a sector, we're notorious for giving people grants with the expectation that you'll take one of society's most difficult problems and you'll solve it in a year, because somehow that's become the grant period. What are you going to accomplish in that year? What's the measure of progress? And keep in mind that most things we fund, we tend to look at success as a binary. We either were successful or we weren't. And the reality is there's an analog slope of success. And so you need to know where you're going. I want to, just interject here for a second. We've got a few minutes left. If people have questions, they should certainly send them along. And I also want to make an appeal that people will send us their stories. I believe one of our roles is to help share your stories of success with other funders, so they can learn from you. They can realize they're not alone. So at the end, I'm going to ask you to be sharing that with me. Jonathan, another campaign I've been learning about as I've been working with your team is the One Day campaign, which sounds like another opportunity for people to get involved. Do you want to chat about that for a sec?
Sure. So again, somewhat prompted by Charlottesville and prompted by all the expressions of intolerance, which we seem to see with regularity in the public conversation, we realized, us and some of our partners, that there was no single day, literally, where Americans are prompted to stand up and step forward and say no to stereotypes and push back against hate. So we endeavored, again, with some partners, to create, if you will, the Giving Tuesday against hate. And we're calling that One Day. So One Day will be the first Monday in October, and One Day will be a recurring day on the calendar. They'll be curated by ADL and several other national organizations, but enable a massive grassroots movement to allow people at the individual level, at the community level, to step forward and take actions against hate. So it's not about the ADL or any particular nonprofit or any company. It's about all of us, from your average citizen to a U.S. senator, from a corporate CEO to a community activist, to finding ways to step up and demonstrate that they have a degree of understanding, if you will, and an appreciation for the value of difference and diversity. And anyone can be involved. Houses of worship like a church or your synagogue or your mosque, local schools, colleges, again, small businesses, large corporations, elected officials. I mean, the idea is to find a day on the calendar where we can bring Americans together, regardless of their politics, regardless of their geography, regardless of their race or faith or gender or sexual orientation. We can bring America together on one day to step up, to lock arms, and to say no to hate. And again, that will be this year, Monday, October 1st, and every year it will be the first Monday in October. And you can find out more at our website. Go to adl.org/oneday.
Great. Thank you for that. Jonathan, I want to jump back to metrics in response to a question somebody typed in here. Are there particular, obviously it depends on what you're funding or the program, but are there particular things people should look at? Because I could imagine one could overwhelm the brain with data and metrics about all kinds of issues. Are there certain key things that people should be looking at?
Well, I think, there's different kinds of measures, Henry. Obviously, this, but there are measures of output and there are measures of outcome.
Yep, absolutely.
Typically, you start with output. So you want to know that a program is actually delivering on what it says. So take ADL's anti-bias programs. How many classrooms do they reach in your local community? How many schools are using it, right? What kind of success, what's the renewal rate of those programs in the local community? There are a set of core measures around output that can give you some indication of the program's operational capability. And then secondly, there are measures of outcome, which is the program actually delivering on what it promises to achieve. So for example, on an anti-bias program, you want to know, okay, well, can you show me that the level of bullying or the level of bias in the school that implemented your program has decreased by a certain amount relative to a control group that didn't use the program? Can you demonstrate for me the efficacy of this initiative that promised to increase tolerance or understanding among a particular cohort, or again, on a broader community basis? So the problem with output metrics, where I started, is that they don't tell you if the program really works. And the challenge with outcome metrics, as I just said, is it typically takes a long time to measure efficacy, and sometimes it can be very difficult to ascertain the real causality. But still, it just depends on what kind of program you want to get engaged in, whether it's around, again, fighting hate or increasing tolerance or kind of reducing bullying. But look for output metrics and outcome metrics in order to understand where to put your dollars.
Well said. And I think, again, I'll reiterate, understanding that these are small steps. I don't think this is going to get solved overnight.
Yeah.
Just keeping that point in mind. Somebody else asked about, they noted that they're a community foundation and they feel they're one of the few who are taking actions, wondering how we can create a bigger force to fight hate crimes. I mean, it seems to me that you, through your 26 offices across the country. Did I pay attention? Get that right? Yeah. There may be opportunities there. I think I can certainly feel free to say that at Exponent, we're happy to help connect people who want to work together in a given community and move this. This is not a one and done kind of program. And I, for one, am fully committed to working towards this in general. So for the person who asked that question, send me an email and we will figure it out together. I'm not sure I have all the answers, but we have to do this. It goes back to that moral imperative I spoke about at the beginning.
Yeah. I got to say, I think community foundations have a really particularly important role to play, because community foundations tend to be long-standing, deeply embedded in local communities, and inherently bring together all the different actors. So, one day, the initiative I just mentioned has been supercharged with support from the Schusterman Foundation, which is a very big, generous, Lynn Schusterman's amazing people at Schusterman Foundation. That said, you can imagine one day really taking off when we can get a network of community foundations around the country who say, in Oklahoma City, or in Sacramento, or in Boston, or in Chicago, or in Milwaukee, or in New Orleans, or in, Durham, I don't know, but all these different places where they want to organize their own one-day activities, whether it's, a table talk at local companies, or a teach-in at the school, or a concert against hate, or a walk against hate. But I think community foundations could have a really consequential role to play in making this kind of grassroots initiative really successful.
And I'll extend that one more piece, Jonathan, and say that's also a wonderful opportunity for local private foundations, family foundations, to partner with the community foundations. We're all part of the philanthropic fabric that is the fuel Jonathan talked about of civil society. So this is not a time for any of us to have a sense of propriety or a sense of, I have to do this on my own. We need to work together. So if the community foundation is the melting pot, so to speak, that's great. Let's all dive in together and make it happen.
I totally agree with that. And the other thing I would say that the Family Foundation can bring, and I guess the Community Foundation too, is this should not be an issue that has anything to do with politics.
Absolutely.
So there's nothing partisan in fighting prejudice. There's nothing, ideological in calling out extremism. And there's nothing political per se in saying there's a core set of principles which animate, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, that we want to lift up and really elevate and amplify. So again, foundations, private, family, community, which typically are very apolitical, can really exemplify that by getting involved in this type of work.
I think if there was any topic, any subject that is as bipartisan as it could be, is as at its core fundamentally morally correct, standing up against hate has got to be it.
I agree with that.
And I would think anybody who would argue that probably is in the wrong line of business if you're in philanthropy.
You said it.
Jonathan, we're getting near the end here. Any final words, advice? I know our members are oftentimes focused on the very practical things they can do. You've touched on a lot of them. Are there any you want to just reemphasize or parting words?
Well, like I said before, I said it in a little different manner, but there is no silver bullet. So ADL alone doesn't have the answers, or SPLC doesn't have the answers, or any one group doesn't have the answers. So I would encourage foundations to use a little bit of portfolio theory and make multiple investments, and to explore different options, and to evaluate the results and iterate to improve them, and really, again, invest and scale up what works. So number one, knowing that there is no kind of magic wand, be prepared to make multiple, even small investments to see what works. And number two, I would encourage people to take risks. So again, if you're interested in ADL, one of the things we've done, just as an example, is we've taken risks. So we see the front line in fighting hate. It's really Facebook. The slander and stereotypes that spread on social media are stunning and alarming. So we literally launched a new center on technology and society in Silicon Valley toward the end of last year. And that was supported by seed capital from two private kind of philanthropists. Exactly what you're talking about, Henry. So we're innovating, we're coloring outside the lines, we're taking risks and experimenting with new approaches and piloting new techniques. But I think that's fundamental to try to tackle these issues and actually make a dent. So again, try more stuff, take risks, and I said watch the numbers. Pay attention to the metrics because they matter.
Thanks, Jonathan. I would footnote his last remark by saying we all have the ability as small staff funders in our communities to make that difference. We're not all going to Silicon Valley. We're not all dealing necessarily at that scale or at the scale that ADL can. But this has got to come top down. It's got to come bottom up. And all of us represent that bottom up from where we can come. So Jonathan, my sincere thanks to you, to your staff who helped make it possible, to my colleague Althea sitting beside me for your help and assistance in putting this together. To all of you who joined us today, thanks for your time, your interest, and your desire to confront hate. And as I said at the start, this is a beginning. So quite sincerely, share your stories with me, share your ideas. Somebody asked about follow-up webinars. I'd love to talk to you about ideas and what we can be doing, because I'm committed to helping us move all of this forward. It's just henry@exponentphilanthropy.org. It isn't that hard. I read my own email. I will answer you.
And if you want to get to me, I'm Jonathan@adl.org.
And he also answers his email. I have gotten those emails from Jonathan. So, Jonathan, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And we'll look forward to more, and we'll go from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.